welcome to tonight's webinar. Originally, the subject was going to be vaccine hesitancy among people of color and how to avoid it. And then in the last couple of weeks with the vaccine mandates, it seemed that it was no longer necessary to discuss that subject. And we were going to talk about other subjects related to vaccine mandates and mask mandates. And just yesterday, a federal court judge in upstate New York enjoined the enforcement of the new vaccine mandate in New York State for healthcare workers because it didn't consider religious exemptions. So this is still an ongoing issue. Also in Texas, Governor Abbott is trying to get the legislature to ban vaccine mandates in Texas. And I believe a similar bill is going through the legislature in Florida and some other states. There's also a big fight over mask mandates, whether or not they should be allowed, particularly for kids in school. And it's a big issue now, and the country seems to be divided among the red states versus blue states primarily. Interestingly enough, the COVID rates are currently much higher in the red states still, today being October 12th, 2021. We're now 19 months into the pandemic. And there was a time period after the vaccines became readily accessible when everybody was hopeful that we'd be out of this by now. But now it looks like this might be here for a while, if not forever. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our guests tonight, our special guests. We have Ed Young, who is an advisor. He's also an entrepreneur in the tech space and is the founder of several healthcare IT companies, as well as a NFT company for the hip hop community. And we also have Brad Hamilton, who is the founder of the Hatch Institute, which is an institute to promote investigative journalism. And I am sure we are going to have a wonderful conversation. There is no live audience tonight, but this webinar will be online for on-demand use in the future, and hopefully will generate some comments and some thought, because this is an evolving area. And so with that in mind, I will hand over the microphone, so to speak, to our moderator, Brad Hamilton. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be here, and welcome to both of you. I'm glad to be participating in this discussion of a subject that has baffled quite a number of us in terms of just trying to think about why it is that some people have been steadfastly against being vaccinated, whether there are cultural, economic, political influences on that decision making. And so it's great that we have Ed here, because Ed is well tapped into the community where one part of it is definitely firmly against being vaccinated. And in preparation for this, we've had some very lively discussions, I have to say. I've gotten to know Ed a little bit. He's got some great insights into some of the reasons why folks of color have been and continue to be so against this. And I know Ed is a promoter of the ingestion of quality information, as well as someone who advocates for healthy practices. So with that in mind, I think one of the things that came up early on when we were discussing this, Ed, was a historical reference that you cited, that you knew about, and that some people are vaguely aware of, but not fully aware of. And it's one of those talking points in the sense that people use it as a point of reference when they're trying to understand why they might be against going along with a government that's promoting a particular vaccine. And that has to do with this historical thing that Ed knows about. He quizzed me on it. I didn't know that much about it. And it turns out that what I knew was sketchy, but Ed's conclusion is that a lot of people simply had it wrong. So you want to get into that? Because I love that, that point that you talked about.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, we have had lively discussions, good ones. And my wife is a doctor. She's a family medicine specialist. And we've been together since before medical school. So many of our friends are doctors. So I'm exposed to docs on a regular basis. And, and docs from, Black doctors, white doctors, and all other ethnicities and what have you. And so their patient bases are broad and varied. But in the Black community, one of the things that comes up frequently, I have what I call soft tech companies that in the healthcare space. And one of the things that comes up frequently is references to the Tuskegee experiment. And the Tuskegee experiment is something that a lot of people have heard about, a lot of people across cultures, and in the Black community, many people, there is a distrust of the medical establishment and the government putting out things to the community. And I would argue that it's justifiable in many respects. But when the pandemic started and the vaccines were being distributed, I would hear people reference the Tuskegee experiment. But the thing that became clear is that a lot of people reference the Tuskegee experiment, but they don't know what it really was. They think that, and so I started surveying people and saying, okay, what's the Tuskegee experiment? And this is people from, Ivy League educated, Black, white, Asian, to people just in the neighborhood, barber shop, whatever. And 99% of people would get it wrong, what the Tuskegee experiment was. It would range from the confusion of the Tuskegee Airmen as part of the experiment but basically the general consensus was that the government infected Black men with syphilis and they were experimenting on them. And I get why you would think that, because an experiment is usually an active thing, you're experimenting. The Tuskegee experiment ran from 1932 to 1972. Tuskegee at that point in 1932 had a ridiculously high percentage of the population that had syphilis, and particularly among the Black male population, it was rampant apparently. And so the experiment was they went and found men who had what they at that time called bad blood. And so that ranged from syphilis to anemia to all these different things. And so they found these men who had syphilis and they told them they were going to be in this program to treat them, basically. So in 1940, the cure for syphilis was discovered. 42, it became widely available. So 10 years after the program starts, you have the ability to truly effectively treat and cure these people of their syphilis. The experiment was what happens when you don't treat, when you withhold medicine, when you withhold treatment, without telling these men that they weren't being treated. And so the outcome, really bad stuff happens. In 72, thereabouts, it got exposed. And so all the but what's fascinating to me is that people think it was an actively infecting a population, when in fact it's the withholding of treatment. And so I looked at that and said, this is fascinating. So people aren't getting vaccinated because they think the government might be giving them something. Now, mind you, when the vaccines came out in many Black communities around the country, you saw white people who have never been to those communities ever before coming to them to get the vaccine because they were available. So you have white folks going to Black communities to get this vaccine So if it was something bad, the white folks were getting it. It was just, so if you do an empirical analysis, it just doesn't make sense. Like it just, but the crazy part was the Black folks who were not getting the vaccine, I looked at that and I was like, wow, this is the new Tuskegee experiment. Because part of the rationale behind the vaccine hesitancy was coming from things on the internet that another one of my companies, we created a proprietary browser in partnership with Firefox to help promote and surface Black content on the web, because the algorithms that run the search engines and what have you don't pull that content up to the fore generally. And so, but one of the things we're able to do is track where stuff is coming from. And so a lot of the Twitter handles, a lot of the Twitter personalities that have Black faces on them are actually bots that are coming out of places like Russia, and they find a picture of a Black individual and they put stuff into the feed. So this was happening with the political campaigns and everything. It's not people, it's propaganda coming from overseas, cast as a Black person saying it, and they were putting stuff out saying, don't get vaccinated.
And was the Tuskegee experiment misinformation and misunderstanding part of that campaign?
Yes. Yeah.
So what you're saying is the exact opposite of what actually happened was the takeaway all these years later. In other words, members of the Black community were saying, well, we remember what happened back in the day, which was the government infected us with syphilis. And that was their little experiment upon us to see what happened, kind of like Nazi-like. Okay, we're gonna act as God here. We're gonna inject you with this dangerous disease and then watch you fall to pieces. When in fact, what happened was they were actually just studying them initially to try to get an understanding of the disease. And then 10 years into this experiment, the vaccine was approved and distributed. And at that point, they withheld it, I guess, from all or some or most of the population that was there. And
all the people in the experiment. It wasn't even like they had to control. They were studying what happens when you don't treat people.
Right. So in other words, they continued to study it, even though there was this option to treat and cure their disease. And so now we've essentially got the opposite thing happening, which is that some people in the Black community are saying, well, because the government evilly, in this nefarious way, injected us previously with the disease of syphilis, we don't trust you to be injecting us with vaccine. When in fact, and I'm assuming at the time, the reason that white folks were going to the Black community was because they knew that this was an effective vaccine and they could get it there. They could actually get the vaccine.
That is why, exactly. So the funny thing is though, and this is where it just didn't make sense. And I talked to people, my wife had patients and everything, and she would talk to, and when you say, okay, so think about this, what you have to believe for this to be true is that the people administering the vaccine have two cases, like, it's like, Jim Crow vaccination schedule, whites only, coloreds, or something like that. And okay, if a Black person's in front of you, give them the colored vaccine. And if the white person's there, you give them the white vaccine. But no, because so many of the people administering the vaccines are people who look like me. And it's like, so they would have to be complicit in this in order for it to be, or you have to believe that the vaccine has been manufactured to target Black people specifically. And I'm sorry, no offense, but the folks making this, they're not that smart. Okay, we haven't gotten that genetic targeting down to science yet. Okay, so no, that's not what's happening. So you can't even rationally get through as to how that's really an issue. And when you present it to people in this rational stepwise process, most of them come around, because the reality, look, people are smart. There's just a lot of fear out there. This pandemic is scary to people. It shouldn't be as scary as it is, but it is. It's scary. Like 80% of people are fine when they get this virus. The issue is one of infrastructure, and we've talked about this. The issue is that our society, because we've been so healthy, and globally, humans have never had such a low mortality rate as we've had over the past 80 years in all of human history. This is unprecedented times. And now we have a virus that's elevating that mortality rate and that hospitalization utilization rate to what was normal in the past. But we've been so blessed over these past 80 or so years that we don't have the infrastructure to handle what had been normal.
You mentioned something. You mentioned something. In part, a part of that, I think, Ed, is this fear factor. So let's look at this fear factor. The fear factor. How does that intersect with one's inability? Now, obviously, not everyone has the same level of education. Not everyone has the same level of access to. Well, I mean, actually, most people do have the same level of access of information. People may not be as experienced in terms of finding that information. And you, as an advocate of quality information, I'm wondering how you look at this vector, this intersection between fear, because people are afraid, certainly, and this inability to get quality information, this susceptibility to believing that this bot posing as a Black person saying,
well, because it's confirmation bias, right? It's confirmation bias. If you're scared about getting, look, many people are scared of getting a needle. Then they're scared of something being put into their body. The vaccines were created at an unprecedented rate. There are actually rational reasons behind that, because mRNA has been worked on for over a decade, and the issue was inflammation. Miraculously, the inflammation challenge was solved just like about 6 months prior to the pandemic starting. Like, this is like a gift from God that just happened. You know, it's like the simultaneous invention of radio. You know, it's like, whoa, how'd that happen? It's that kind of thing. Like, we made the breakthrough with mRNA at just the right time. So,
but it's the mRNA. But many people do cite the novelty of an mRNA vaccine as one reason why they don't want to
granted,
get it.
And I look, I was one of those people. I'm actually in the clinical trial for the Janssen vaccine, because I looked at it and I said, one of the things that I advocate for is diversity in clinical trials, because so many of the medicines we use are based upon studies done on white men in Northern Europe. And that's like, even for women's health, you have, you know, studies that were clinical trials that were white guys. Like, how does that make sense? And so, but if we don't step up, how can you argue about that? And so I'm in the clinical trial for Janssen, the Johnson & Johnson one. And so and that's scary. It's scary. You know, I had choices, and look, there's this reality. I had two choices of locations to do it. And there's one that I'm not going to name the places, but there's one in a place I was like, I don't think I should go to that area to do a clinical. I'm making a leap as it is. Don't double down on stupid like this. It's like, so
you're saying you personally understand the sort of intrinsic hesitance to
absolutely
to dealing with something that's novel, to dealing with something that supposedly is a cure. It is an effective vaccine, but because of mRNA, because the fact that it was developed quickly, all that stuff, people are just generally suspicious.
But Brett, you said something important. Because it's an effective vaccine, how do you know that? Well, that's the fact that, okay, in March, the first people got it, right?
Right. Exactly.
March 2020. I've lost track of time. So, and now we have all of this time to see. Do you see zombies in the street?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Are people bleeding out all around you?
Well, I did see one zombie, but that's only because Halloween is coming.
There you go. Okay, so you're right, an early one, right? So you look at it, if you're a rational being at this point, you can't make the argument that these things are dangerous. Or if they are, you're saying, oh, well, in 2 years, people are going to drop dead. Well, okay, you know what? At a certain point, and we've talked about, there's a level of community sociopathy that sets in to reinforce that fear, to give that comfort to being fearful, because we've seen that the communities that are vaccinated, they're helping their neighbor. It helps. There's no question. You can't argue that. And so there's nothing but fear driving it, or abject lack of consideration for others.
Well,
It's
and that's a really interesting point, Ed, because I think that, just prior to the scheduling of this event, one of the things that we noted was that the mandates went into effect and it was having its desired effect. Meaning
so
that
yes.
people were getting the shot when they weren't getting the shot.
Okay, so listen, this is where I'll say, and I'm proud of my people, right? This is like, because
Exactly.
there's fear, there's discomfort, there's history, but now the empirical evidence like flies in the face of what may be on social media and all of this stuff. And so, but when the mandates came out and said, oh, wait, if you're not getting vaccinated, you can't get work. So there's a conscious decision. It's like, you know what? I need to feed my family.
Yep.
I'll overcome my fear. I'll overcome all of this disquiet. I'm going to feed my family. And that's why I think it's working. I mean, that's the thing. Like at some point you're forced into rationality and saying it's about. So
one of the things that encourages rationality is encouragement from people around you. One of the things that they talked about early on when the vaccine was rolling out was like, look, don't listen to me on your TV set or Dr. Fauci on your TV set. Listen to the guy or the woman who has been treating you as a patient for the last 10 or 20 or 30 years. You trust that person. That's your doctor. That's the person you go to when there's something wrong. Ask that person, right? So now what you've got a knock-on effect, I believe, from this mandate is that people who were in some ways like forced or strongly encouraged because of the economic consequences of not doing so, they're encouraged to get the vaccine. They get the vaccine and guess what? Nothing happens to them. They don't grow a second head. They don't die of a heart attack the next day. All of those things that we know are actually true from the vast rollout. And then that person is in a sense an example.
They're an ambassador,
others.
right?
Exactly.
And it's like, and my wife is, I think, a saint. She just, because this is why I'm not a doctor. Let's say, because she has patients who are like, well, should I get vaccinated? Well, and she'll tell, yes, I advise you to get vaccinated. She got vaccinated, and she's like, well, and the patient will go, well, yeah, but I heard, and like if something like you heard from who? From the other person who has 30 years of experience and and has been doing and has all of these patients and all that. And it's like she has patience with her patients, and God bless her. Like I'm like, okay, how are you saying something that's stupid to your doctor? Like that's just ridiculous.
Well,
but
we also know that there's, in addition to all the other factors swirling around, that there is a basic misunderstanding of what a vaccine actually is.
Yes, because like the people who are like, well, they got the vaccine and they had side effects and it was terrible. And like, that's what's supposed to, that means you have a healthy immune system. When you get a little fever, you get chills, that's your immune system doing its job. That's what's supposed to occur. And people, and so you hear that and you just listen, and the lack of thoughtfulness, the lack of what the folks that I really just get so frustrated with are these talking heads on TV who will say these things. And I can't tell, do they really not know? Are they really that ill-educated, or do they know and they just hate people and are trying to sow discord? Or I mean, I
think a lot of it has to do with expediency in terms of like ratings or in terms of political power. Because I mean, if you look, for example,
that's just evil, right? But that's just evil.
Correct. That's right.
That is evil. If you're doing it for ratings, if you're doing it for political ascendancy or whatever, so you're saying, I'm going to mislead people and put them at risk so that I can be politically ascendant. So what you're saying is, I'm going to elevate myself by doing evil. It's like people who vote for the lesser of two evils. It's like, okay, so you just told me you're voting for evil. No, I didn't. Yeah, the lesser of two evils, by your own admission, you're voting for evil. It's like, come on, people, what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, a good example of this is at 20th Century Fox. There is where the Fox Corporation in general, there's a very, very strict mandate. You know, you absolutely need to get vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, you need to be checked every single day. So there's very little wiggle room at Fox, and yet the folks on Fox are strongly advocating, like, resist. You have to resist when the man comes and tells you you need to get vaccinated. So they themselves are compliant. They have to be, because otherwise they wouldn't be working there.
So
And
they
yet,
acquiesce to the man, but their man's okay to acquiesce to, but the man fight that. See,
that's right.
that's
right.
I can't even get my head around that. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I looked at it like, look, doing the clinical trial. I said, well, okay, you got to do this, got to step up. If it kills me, at least I died trying to help other people. That's a good death.
Well, and that's exactly what we were talking about as one of the interesting, let's say, effective motivators, which is helping your fellow man, right? That's one of the reasons why it's a big reason why we wear masks, right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
if you're vaccinated and you're wearing a mask, it's not really because you need to protect yourself. You're vaccinated. Or if you're vaccinated and you previously had COVID and you beat it, you know that your immune system is working just fine.
Right.
You're wearing a mask because because you're an understanding person and you've read about this, you know that you are also capable of carrying and passing along the virus to someone else. And so you wear a mask when you're out in public.
And
And
I
it's
tell
just it's a courtesy.
I tell people, look, I even more so, I wear a mask for other people because I assume that I'm always contagious. I'm married to a doctor. So just make the assumption that I'm contagious. There's an 80% probability that if I had it, that I won't even know, but you're still contagious when you don't know. That's how just wily this virus is. That's part of the challenge of defeating it. And so, but people who don't, like, just wear the mask. And then I see guys, like, it's acting like it's weak to wear a mask. Well, you're weak if you can't wear a mask. So you can't breathe through some cloth, you big wimp. Like, what is that? You can't breathe through cloth. You can't, like, it's hurting your ears or whatever. Like, that's like, you're like the weakest person if mask wearing is that difficult for you. That's a weak individual.
That's interesting, the way you perceive it and the way you express it. It's hard sometimes to get that message through. And then on the other end, sadly, we talked about those people who struggle with the disease, who did contract COVID and then are on a respirator. They're fighting for their lives. And at that point, I think, Ed, you talked about there are patients that your wife has treated or has come in contact with who then ask for the vaccine after they're, basically already on a ventilator.
Wife is in the hospital. Yeah, we have colleagues in the hospital. They're like asking at that point, okay, I want the vaccine. That's not how they work. That's not, you want monoclonal antibodies, you want remdesivir, but it's not the vaccine. It's just this lack of information and knowledge that is just killing people.
It literally is. And of course, it transcends all demographics, young and old, black and white, every different type of population.
Yep.
Does suffer from a portion of that community getting hold of bad information or making assumptions or just grasping at straws to try to defend the position that they have as to why they shouldn't be vaccinated. So I also, like, you talked a little bit about, you told an interesting story when we were prepping for this that I thought was quite telling. In the vein of talking about support for your community and protecting and dying for your cause, kind of like what you're saying, like, I'm willing to do something that potentially could be endangering me, but I'm doing it because I want to help fellow men. You had an interesting conversation with a pastor on this subject and was revealing as to what his perspective was. Can you share that story?
And it's just, I'm telling the story because it's so sad. So a pastor of a large church and his wife at an event and not wearing a mask. Everybody, and they were told, oh, we're wearing masks. And like, oh, we're vaccinated. I'm wearing a mask because I'm vaccinated. But I'm wearing the mask for other people because I could be contagious. So the pastor's wife is like, basically says, well, that's debatable. My response was, well, No, that's how science works. The science God created, that's how it works. You could be. But the thing that struck me is if you're a pastor and a pastor's wife, you have a big flock, that you're going to say it's debatable whether or not one could be contagious and whether or not if you're vaccinated, you could infect someone. Christian, I'm a Christian. My understanding is that I would do everything possible to err to the side of caution. If it is debatable and there's a chance that I could harm someone, I would do everything possible not to harm someone because I love my neighbor. But instead, what they're saying is they're making the decision to not wear a mask. It's debatable, so they might be able to harm someone, and that's okay with them. And that's like, what is wrong with people? Like, have you read this book? It's the Bible.
Maybe they haven't. Maybe they haven't read the book.
I'm just like, I mean, to me, that's just heartbreaking that you can actually make that decision. It's first, like doctors, first do no harm. You know, as a pastor, you're supposed, that's love your neighbor. Put yourself in a position of discomfort to help others. Put yourself behind others. Put others' interests and needs ahead of your own. That's what it's about. But
it's not just Christianity. I mean, every
but that's as our
religion.
leaders. What, like, we don't even understand. You're elected to office. You're a servant to the public. You're supposed to serve the public's interest, not do what you want to do for your interest and your comfort and your aggrandizement. That's not what it's supposed to be. But that's what we've turned this all into. And it's like my personal liberties. That's the rallying call. Your personal liberty. We've forgotten that the way we work together, the reason America is supposed to be great, like make America great. America's great because we have a social contract that brings people together in a way that no other country on planet Earth is capable of doing. That people came from all over the place, some unwillingly, but many willingly, coming here together and working and living together and creating something magnificent. That's what makes America great, not your personal liberty and your undying pursuit of what you want.
Joe, my question then is, do you think that this pandemic and to some extent the persistent resistance to getting vaccinated, do you think that that's testing in a fundamental way this social contract?
Well, Dan frightened me when he brought up the cases, and as he's outlining what's going on now, the thing that's most disturbing is that, yes, you're seeing fault lines that last time they were like this resulted in the Civil War. And if you listen to what Dan was referring to, the mandates and the arguments being made against them, they're essentially states' rights arguments that are being asserted. So now the religious freedom one is a very interesting one because I am all for religious freedom. The challenge is, where is it? It's like the First Amendment, but religious freedom takes precedence over that. It's the one give me in the Constitution that is where you have choice as the deterministic factor. It's like, and so you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. We had this discussion. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. You're responsible for the harm that would ensue, causing that, commotion.
Well, what about the harm that a pastor is, or a rabbi, or an imam who is advocating against that which is that would help protect the public, would help protect that particular congregation? I mean, where do we assess that sort of responsibility?
This is a very hard question, because you run into, look, religious freedom is fundamental to and in the Constitution. you have faiths that don't believe in medicine, don't believe in, blood transfusions, don't believe in injecting things into one's person. And so you have to respect that. Now, ideally, and this is where you can get very logical and practical about it. They are a small minority of the population who believe those things. And so if they do end up remaining unvaccinated because of their religious convictions, it's probably going to be okay. They don't represent a large enough percentage of the population that it will be a major challenge.
What you're saying is that if the only people who were resisting the vaccine were those who were doing so for strictly religious reasons, it wouldn't be necessarily a problem that we have.
Right. If the only ones that are doing it are allowed to not do it under the mandate is based on religious conviction, yeah, we'd probably be okay. Now that's just a good happenstance relative to how COVID works. If it were much more infectious, that may not hold true. And so hopefully we won't find that out. But under this scenario, okay, that percentage of the population, and there's the argument that because they hold those beliefs, that's also why they're such a small percent of the population. You can extrapolate that as well, because
right. It's you look at the Christian Scientist community and some of the ravages that have occurred within that community.
Exactly. And that's, look, I believe in healing. I also believe that God made doctors. So, that's the part that seems Luke was a doctor, apparently. It's like he's one of the 12. And so, so doctors are bad. No, they're hanging out with Jesus. So anyway, so that's a whole nother discussion, right? So
well, let's think about what going forward. What going forward. I mean, you do have many people assessing the situation, this conflict that continues to persist. As is extremely threatening and troubling, potentially a flashpoint, whether that's something like civil war, which, one would hope that is not actually going to happen. But of course, there's always the option of something less severe that creates problems, whether it's these ongoing clashes between protesters and counter-protesters, or whether it's simply just like this unquieted anger. This bitterness and resentment among people who are clinging to this, this stated resistance being, I'm against it because I'm for my personal liberty. I don't want to be told what to do, and you can't make me do anything. Like, how does that play out going forward? Will those people eventually quiet down, or do you think that that's just something that it will never go away?
I don't know. I think that we're at a stage where people are truly entrenched and we have a problem. I'm looking at this and I said, go back and survey the papers from Europe in the 1780s, early 1780s. And, we call that the age of revolution. And the papers seem quite the same. The arguments that were being leveled against the monarchy or the aristocracy, the popular, we're not in a good time right now.
What's odd about it, is the perceived act of tyranny from the government is essentially a program to try to keep us all safe.
Brad, just stop being rational, please. Stop. Your head's gonna explode on camera. Right. You can't get your head around this stuff.
Right.
It's really, it's like, people are thinking at cross purposes. That's the, I have a problem. I can't align with the political party because it requires me to keep fundamentally diametrically opposed ideas in my head at the same time.
Well, that's interesting. I think if there's anything that's common among the extremes on this, whether it's, conservative or liberal, it seems to be the commonality is disgust with the government, frustration with the government,
Right.
exasperation over inaction and inability to work together. So the very thing that's happening in our communities, right? Lack of communication, lack of trust, lack of willing to work with each other, lack of willing to, that social contract, protect each other. That thing is playing out to an extreme level within the Congress itself, within the government, where you have these two parties that it's just, and frankly, one is just a little bit more aggressive than the other in terms of saying, we absolutely will never, ever work with you again. We don't want to hear from you. We don't think anything that you have to say is valid. We will oppose absolutely everything that you want to do, and we'll use every means necessary to regain power. When you get that kind of extremism, I mean, the question is like, how do we come back from that? I mean, you're starting to see already there's like branches of the GOP where they're like, this is not the party that I have known.
Well, this is a good point. I love talking to you, Brad. You always get to so why do we think this is a two-party system? Where does that come from?
It comes from the way that it's always been, essentially.
No, it hasn't. No, it has not always been that way. It actually,
yes, that's true, but it's been this way for a long time.
It's like people think the Supreme Court has to have an odd number of people.
Right.
It was 6 at the beginning, and people sitting there like the Supreme Court battles and like, oh, this is going to change the tenor of the court for the next 50, 100 years. Like, what is wrong with people? Has no one read the Constitution? Like, it's like there's no set number that have to be there.
Right. If there was the political will, we could have 23.
Exactly. It's whatever. People don't even know what they're talking about. People losing sleep, getting medicated over this stuff. It's like, if it's really that bad, change it, people. The Constitution gives you power. You can make amendments. You can do all of it. It's not just the people sitting in Congress. It's the people. And now, with the ability to communicate with one another, the people should have more power, not less. But they've abdicated their ability because they don't know what their power is. They don't read anything. So they don't even know what they're capable of doing under the Constitution that grants them these rights.
So I think one of the fundamental elements of what we're facing here as a society is the fact that people are unwilling to actually spend the time to educate themselves.
Right.
And combining that with, when they do seek out information, it's either confirming the bias that they have already, or they're just susceptible to being duped by information that's created by a bot or some kind of algorithm, or just simply a bad actor, a character that's out there trying to foment discord. And that seems like a big part of this vaccine issue, right? If the symptom of the disease is vaccine hesitation or hesitancy or resistance, the disease is this pervasive injection, if you will, of disinformation and bad actors who really just are purposefully doing so for their own means.
Right. I absolutely agree. You're right. And how do we get around that? How do we get people to develop a healthy desire for finding truth? Look, I had a conversation earlier today, and I've referenced you. I asked you when we first met. I was the editor of the school newspaper in middle school, and I learned journalism. And you go and you find who, what, where, why, when, how. And it's just and the people would bring their articles, and I'd say, that's your opinion. Tell me who, tell me what, take your opinion out of it. But now journalists apparently don't really learn this and don't believe that that's possible.
Well, some do and some don't.
Right, but you can't find it any longer because they're all shooting for that headline that's going to get the eyeballs. And it's really frustrating and dangerous. This has been going on for enough years that we're seeing the results. And there is such a thing.
So if journalists aren't taking the time to investigate and find the sourcing and evaluate properly information, then you can be sure that average people aren't doing that either.
Right. And we've got it, but we get it. Like, it's almost to the point where all of our papers and everything are op-eds. It's not, it's like who I think, what I think, where I think, why I think, and it's no, 2 + 2 is 4. Sorry.
Well, I mean, my perspective with the media is that, the media is owned by companies which are owned by people, and every person has their own personal ideas about things. So when you have a powerful organization, you as the owner of that organization, you have a certain perspective. You believe certain things, you value certain things. So that publication is probably more than likely to reflect those views of yourself, of your colleagues, the people who are working on the paper.
Fair.
So I think every newspaper, every publication is imbued to some degree with the personal opinions of the people who are producing it.
Right.
The job of a journalist is to try to separate those from that which you're actually evaluating. And now, of course, you have the third factor, which is what is it that people want, or can we create that need? And I think that's really kind of driving it as well.
That's the big problem, I think. That's the major part of the problem, because what is delivered to you ends up being based upon what the people want. And so you have this endless confirmation bias occurring that's enabled by the algorithms that drive content to you.
And it's a cycle. So the media produces that which the people want, or they think they want. The people consume that, they want more of it. And so you wind up the hardcore sort of like investigative work and the analytical work kind of gets pushed to the side because there's less and less appetite for it. And then there's less interest by the media company because it doesn't pay for itself.
Right. I've been in publishing for a long time and not out of it now, out of frustration, really. It's just like, you look at it and I don't know how true investigative journalism can be financed now, other than through philanthropy.
That's how it is. I mean, if you look at like ProPublica, for example, ProPublica is an outstanding organization. One of the things that's helping them, perhaps the greatest thing that's helping them, is that they don't have to chase eyeballs. They don't have to be all clickbaity and put up, pictures of cute animals on their website to try to drive traffic, because that's not their concern. Their concern is serving the public, and also, I mean, frankly, serving those people who are donating. Because the people who donate want something out of it, right? You donate something, yes, because you're altruistic, but you're also hoping for an end result. Right. So I think more and more that is, I mean, obviously I run an organization that functions in that way. It survives because people give money to it because they want to see something going on that they don't see out there now. So anyway, I think that we've zoomed around a lot.
Like all over the place.
But I think that what's interesting to me about this discussion and the ones that we've had prior to this, Ed, is that this element, this vaccine hesitation or resistance, has spurred a lot because we're trying to get at why it is that someone conceivably would do something that is illogical and could hurt them, right? If you say, okay, you're going to do something that's not logical, and on top of that, you're going to do something that potentially puts you in danger and others at danger, there's got to be something there, strong, that is causing that.
Well, listen, for people of color, I don't think it's irrational, the initial hesitancy. I don't think that's irrational at all, because I say it several times a day. It's not paranoia when they're really out to get you. And Black folks in this country specifically, but other, people of color have had tremendous challenges and, active attempts at not necessarily total extermination, but partial extermination at different points in this country's history.
Are you saying that the government doesn't always have the interests of Black folks at top of their list?
I'm sorry, Brad, but it's like, in spite, even after Obama, it's like, which, by the way, and I want to the most amazing thing about President Obama, a brown man being elected twice, to me, is not the brownness of him. It is that his name was and is Barack Hussein Obama. That's just amazing to me. That gives me hope for this country, that they would elect somebody named Barack Hussein Obama. That is, you can't get further away from, what would be traditional American ideal or whatever. And so anyway, but it's not irrational on Black folks, from perspective for the initial. The problem arose over time that you have to overcome that and look at what's actually happening. The fact that white people were coming into your communities, going to places like in the middle of the night, some places in bad neighborhoods, to get this medicine that was there for you, should tell you, oh, probably not poison. Or you have to believe, and you have to give unbelievable powers to those people who are out to get you if you believe that it has been specially orchestrated to target just you. And so it's
so they in other words, they may have been out to get you. They have been out to get you for sure in the past.
But this isn't how they're going to get you.
But this is not how they're doing it.
Right, exactly. This isn't the answer. Right. And so, and
exactly.
you see it. And what's happening is, you see the numbers have shifted dramatically with the mandates. And when it's like, oh, you know what, I can't work with it, all of it, like, then they engage and they're like, you know what? And now you look at the numbers, we were looking at some numbers, in some places they're outpacing,
yes. Yes, the numbers exactly. They're and Hispanic as well. I mean,
right. And the Hispanic, right. We haven't caught up to the Asians. We haven't caught, but right. That's like they were wearing masks before everybody else in some communities, and some, see like people would, because that's was a cultural thing from Japan, China, where
exactly.
If you had a cold, you'd wear a mask. Like this is, they get it.
So maybe the future is we can knock some sense into the public by simply encouraging them through economic pressure. I mean,
well, we've already known this in the health space. The main way that cigarette smoking, lung cancer has been reduced is by making cigarettes wildly expensive.
Yep, there you go.
That's it. That was
exactly
all the commercials, all that other. Notice you don't even see the commercials. There are no commercials anymore. They don't even have the don't smoke commercials. It's just like, hey, tax it some more.
Exactly. Like just as if taxes were $5 on a gallon of gas, and so a gallon of gas was now $8 or $9, you have a whole lot of people converting to green energy. This has been a fascinating discussion, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us and for providing your insights. And thank you, Dan and Rivka and the entire team at the Florence Belsky Foundation for sponsoring this event. This is the kind of thing that we love to do, and we will undoubtedly do more of in the future. Again, my appreciation to you all. And I think that unless, Dan, there's anything else you'd like to add, this has been a great one.